There is a frequency that only opens after midnight. Most people spin right past it, a wall of static between the stations. But if you stop, if you hold there, sometimes a voice comes through. And some of those voices have been gone for a very long time. Welcome back to the midnight frequency. Turn the lights down. Put the world on hold. For the next few hours, it's just you, the dial, and the dark. What you're about to hear are the calls that came in on the nights nobody could explain, ordinary people, on empty highways and in quiet houses, all reaching for the same phone to say the same thing. I've never told anyone this before. Some of these stories are strange. Some are sad. And a few of them still don't have an ending. So settle in. Keep the lights where they are. The lines are open, and tonight, it seems, the dead still have something to say. Let's begin. The dial lights flicker in the dark as I reach for the phone that shouldn't be ringing. It's 3 a.m., and the streets outside my old house are eerily quiet, save for the distant howl of a wolf echoed through the open windows. Hello. Hello. My voice echoes into the empty room as if seeking an answer. Suddenly, a scratchy static breaks the silence, and the announcer's calm voice cuts in, "Welcome to the midnight frequency." It's Halloween night, and we have an extraordinary number of calls this year. I press my ear harder against the receiver, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Listener 274, you're on the air. My name isn't on any call list I know of. The scratchy static returns as if mocking me, "Go ahead and share your story with us tonight." I hesitate for just a moment too long before finding my voice. My name is Sarah, and this happened last year in Pine Grove, Ohio. A heavy silence hangs on the line until I feel a cold breeze from an unseen door creaking open somewhere nearby. I was working the night shift at the old diner downtown, my voice trembles slightly, in the attic. It's a dusty place filled with pictures of past employees and stacks of menus nobody cares about anymore. The host, his voice calm yet authoritative, says, "Can you tell us more?" I take a deep breath, knowing I'm treading on dangerous ground. One Halloween night, it was just me up there, no customers, no one else around. As the clock hit midnight, my hand accidentally brushed against an old photograph of a waitress who looked eerily familiar. My gaze falls to where that picture used to hang, now missing its frame. I felt this tingling in my fingers, like static electricity coursing through me. I turned away from it, but the moment I did, the phone rang. I grabbed it instinctively, not thinking twice about answering. A chill runs down my spine as I recall that night. It was you. The host's voice is softer now, the midnight frequency listener. "Yes, me," I whisper. I picked up and there were no words on the line. Just a sound. A faint whispering in a language I couldn't understand. The static hisses louder as if amplifying my fear. And then, there was nothing. The phone clicked off before I could say anything. I tried to call again, but it was dead, just like that. I didn't know what to do for the rest of my shift. It felt like someone was watching me, waiting. The host's voice is quiet now. "Tell us, Sarah, did you find any explanation after your shift ended?" I shake my head, wishing he could see the fear in my eyes. No one knew about it until I came home that night and found a note taped to my door. It said, "We are here." The host hesitates, knowing this is where the worst part starts. "Sarah, what happened after you saw that note?" "I couldn't sleep," I whisper back. I was in there all through the night thinking it over, going over every detail of that phone call. Then just before dawn, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, no one was there. A long silence stretches between us. Just a pair of old shoes lying on the floor. The host's voice is barely above a whisper now, did you keep those shoes?" "No," I say, the dread in my voice growing stronger with each word. I couldn't bear to look at them again. The static crackles back up, almost mocking me. "Do you think it was someone else?" "I don't know," I say, feeling a chill run through my body. But every time my phone rings after that night, every Halloween, it's the same old voice whispering into my ear. And sometimes, when I answer, no one is there. The host's calm voice cuts in again, "Is it still happening?" My breathing catches as if the air itself has gone cold. Sometimes. The static returns with a vengeance, almost as if something on the other end of the line doesn't want to be overheard. And then, the phone clicks dead. Sarah hangs up, clutching her mobile like it might protect her from the unseen force that keeps calling. The host's voice fades out with a soft, "Good night, Sarah." The dial lights flicker again as if in agreement with the unspoken question hanging heavy between us all. In the quiet hum of a Savannah evening, as the moon hung low and the air grew heavy with the scent of jasmine, Sarah Green lay awake in her old, frame-ticking bed. It was 3:17 a.m., and her usual companions, clock, radio static, distant dog barks, were now only background noise. Her husband slept soundly beside her, his steady breathing a lullaby she no longer needed. Sarah rolled over, the sheets thin and too cold against her skin. She glanced at the clock once more, 3:17. As if on cue, there came a soft creak from across the room. Sarah sat bolt upright, heart pounding. The rocking chair by the window had begun its nightly jiggle. She got up to investigate, shuffling through the empty night like a ghost herself. The old chair was in place, as if it belonged in the dimly lit corner where shadows danced on the walls. But this time, different. The legs moved together, the fabric of the seat shifting slightly with each slow motion. Sarah's breath hitched. "Whoever is doing this," she whispered to herself, "is no visitor from another world." She circled around the rocking chair cautiously, her hand brushing against the edge of an old wooden table. Suddenly, a chill swept through the room, and the chair stopped in mid-rock. Sarah stood, frozen. She moved closer, eyes wide with dread. The fabric had resumed its motion again, but this time, it wasn't just moving, it was rocking back and forth, a slow, deliberate swaying. It was like staring into an empty, waiting face, silent and unyielding. She took another step forward, her voice barely more than a breath. "Who's there?" But the chair continued to rock. Sarah felt as though she were being watched, even though the room was dark and still. Before she could move closer again, the rocking stopped completely. Sarah froze, listening intently. The silence was deafening, heavy with the knowledge that something, or someone, was about to reveal itself. And then, in the next second, it started all over again. The chair began its rhythmic motion once more, but this time, the pace was faster, and the movement was more vigorous. Sarah's breath came in short gasps as she stumbled back against the wall. She reached for her nightstand phone, fumbling with trembling fingers to dial 911. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening before her eyes. The line connected on the third ring. "Savannah PD," a gruff voice answered. "Help me," she managed to say, her voice quivering. The chair's rocking had stopped abruptly once more, and Sarah felt tears well up as fear overtook her. "I'll send someone right away," the officer said, his tone sympathetic. But before he could finish, the phone went dead in Sarah's hand. There was no more sound from either end of the line, it was completely silent now. Sarah stared at the empty receiver as if it were a window to another dimension. The rocking chair resumed its unsettling pattern, each rock a haunting reminder that she wasn't alone. As dawn started to break outside her window, Sarah knew what she had to do, call back. But when the line rang endlessly and stayed dead, she understood it was a conversation only she would ever hear. And in the silent house, under the watchful eye of the rocking chair, the creaks of the old bed seemed to echo with something more than just her own heartbeat. 3 a.m. and the world is quiet. Too quiet. I can hear my own breathing, heavy with exhaustion, and I'm staring at the phone on my desk, willing it not to ring. But as if sensing my thoughts, the phone lights up in the darkness. My hand trembles as I pick it up. Hello. I say, trying to keep my voice steady. Is this Steve? This is Laura from Dayton, comes a soft whisper. I clear my throat and manage a nod. Laura, yeah, this is me. There's a pause on the other end, like she's gathering her thoughts. The line crackles with static that seems eerily real. I've been wanting to call for, well, I guess it's been almost 3 months now. Ever since he first started coming home from school with bruises. His face would be swollen and he'd be afraid to look at me. He never said anything, but those nights, alone in his room, it was different. Different. The host's voice slows down, becoming a deep rumble, almost as if it's echoing through the haunted house of my memory. Go on, I say softly. I told him everything would be okay, that he should just keep quiet about it. But you know what? Sometimes, Steve, he got too big for his britches. A shiver runs down my spine as she continues. It's been a small thing, mostly at night, when we'd go to bed. You see, there's this spot in our house where it feels like someone has always been watching us, a spot on the edge of the hallway, right outside his room. I can't help but imagine those eyes, hidden from view, peering into my son's bedroom. Every night around 10:30, he'd start crying. His little body would wriggle under the covers and then. The host's voice cuts through the static, his tone growing more urgent. And then I'd find him tucked in perfectly, hands folded just so by someone who wasn't me or my husband. And we've been trying to figure out who it is. She pauses, her words trailing off into a silence that feels like an eternity. Tell me everything, he prompts, his voice strained with concern and curiosity. Well, on the night of Halloween last year, I remember thinking how nice it would be if someone could take care of him for a while. It's been 3 months since then, and something's not right. The host's voice is now barely audible above the noise, but he insists. Describe what happened that night. I went to bed early that night, thinking about all I had planned for Halloween. By the time I was up in his room, he was tucked in tight, the blankets on top of him as if someone wanted to make sure he wasn't cold. The host's voice fades slightly, but he's still there. And you know what? His stuffed bear, which has always been by his pillow, it had fallen off and was lying on the floor beside his bed, and his teddy bear was missing, she whispers. There's a pause so long that I can hear my own heartbeat echoing in the receiver. It doesn't end there, he says slowly. You're sure about this? I couldn't believe it at first, but every night since then, something has been moved in his room. His favorite book is on the floor each morning when we wake up, or a sock from his drawer is folded neatly by his pillow. The host's voice is soft and steady. And one day, I was out shopping with my husband, and he called to say that something had happened in the middle of the night. He said something almost touched his cheek. I can feel sweat starting to form on my forehead as the story builds. What did he say? He just said, Mama, someone's here. The host's voice is a low growl now. What was your reaction? I couldn't get to him fast enough. When I rushed into his room, everything looked normal, his teddy bear back in its place on the pillow, no signs of disturbance. But then he pointed towards the edge of the hallway where we always feel like someone is watching us, and there were two hands there. My throat feels dry as she describes it vividly. The hands, Steve, they were small, like a child's, but they weren't his. They were folded neatly against the wall. Just sitting there by the bed, as if someone had sat down to tuck him in but then left again. A chill runs through me, and I can feel my teeth starting to chatter. Did he say anything else? He just looked at me with those big eyes and whispered, "It's the little girl next door. She likes to come over here." The host's voice drops to a whisper. "And what did you do?" I'm frozen, unable to speak as I recall the scene. I went back downstairs, thinking he was just tired or having a bad dream, but every night since then. Since when? The words are a muffled scream. The hands keep coming back. But this time, she's whispering now, so softly that it's almost like a prayer. They're not just sitting there, they're moving towards his pillow. The host's voice is barely a murmur. And he saw them. He didn't say anything, but I could see his fear in his eyes. She takes a deep breath. I called the police, and they checked the house for signs of entry or disturbance, but found nothing, no evidence that anyone had been here. The host's voice is like a distant echo. What did you do then? I just sat there with him, holding him tightly, trying to keep him from screaming, she says, her voice breaking. Did he stop? No, Steve, they didn't move away after I held him for a while. They were just sitting there, watching. My own heart is pounding so loudly that I can feel the blood rushing through my veins. Did you try to call 911 again? I tried, but by the time help arrived, nothing was out of place. Does he know about this now? The host's voice is barely above a whisper. He knows something's not right, and every night when it happens, I can feel his body tensing up in bed. It's like there's no hiding from that girl anymore. The host's voice fades out, leaving only the static on the line. Do you think you could face her next time? I can hear my own breathing now, ragged and uneven. Steve. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Then the phone goes dead in my hand. In the quiet of an October night, when the world outside had long abandoned the day's heat for the cool embrace of autumn's chill, Sarah called into the midnight frequency. She was tired but had never imagined her late-night call would lead to such a chilling story. Sarah, hello. Is this the midnight frequency? Host, good evening, Sarah. You have reached the midnight frequency. We're here for you tonight. What's troubling your sleep? Sarah, well, it started on the night of Halloween. My husband and I had moved to Salem just before that. We'd always been drawn to its rich history, but we were surprised by what haunted us. Host, tell me more about your new home. A little detail can make a story so much richer. Sarah, it was an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The floors creaked underfoot, and the walls whispered with tales of its past. But you know how it is, move in, and everything feels ordinary after a while. That's when things started. Host, and what did start? Sarah, I was upstairs late one night, sorting through some old boxes from the attic. My husband had been working graveyard shifts for weeks, so he wouldn't be home that night. I thought it would just be quiet and peaceful up there. Host, alone, huh? That sounds perfect. Sarah, it was until something strange began. At first, a faint creaking sound, would settling after years unoccupied. But then... Host, what? Sarah, then I heard laughter. A low, childlike giggle, like they were whispering, or giggling. It made my skin crawl. Host, did you see anything? Anything at all? Sarah, no, not really. The place was dark and old, and I could barely make out the attic's wooden ceiling. But it wasn't just that. There were small, almost unnoticeable footsteps, as if tiny feet were walking around me. Host, and then what happened? Sarah, then the laughter stopped, but the footsteps didn't. They got closer, closer and closer until I thought they might reach out for me. The door to the attic creaked open slowly, almost as if someone, or something, was pushing it. Host, whoa. Did you check who was there? Sarah, no, I didn't dare. I ran down the stairs and into my husband's arms when he finally got home from his night shift. I couldn't shake off that laughter, those footsteps. They wouldn't go away. Host, do you think they followed you back? Sarah, maybe. What if they're in our house now? Always listening to us and giggling every time we move. Host, it's a chilling thought, Sarah. We can't explain it all, but you've shared your story tonight. If anyone else out there has experienced something similar, give us a call. Sarah, I just wish I knew what was going on up there. Host, until next time, Sarah. Take care of yourself and that old house in Salem. Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse. The line crackled and hissed as I tuned into the midnight frequency. It was 2 a.m., and Tucson's night had settled down into its usual quiet, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. I leaned forward in my chair, elbows on the desk, fingers drumming against the receiver. Why did this old phone insist on ringing at such odd hours? I had a half-empty glass of water beside me, condensation dampening the table. The host's voice was calm and unhurried as usual, but there was an undercurrent that made my skin prickle. We've got a call in from Robert in Tucson, he said softly. Robert, your story. My name repeated like an echo in the silence of my living room. Yes, I whispered, barely audible over the static. Tell us about your experience at the old Phoenix Hotel in Tucson. I took a deep breath and began. In May 1987, I was working the night shift as a hotel clerk in downtown Tucson. The Phoenix had been built by a family of local businesspeople back in the early 30s, and it was known for its ghostly history. But that wasn't why I took the job. This part-time position paid extra and allowed me to stay late after my regular work shift. My room was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the parking lot below. One night, around midnight, I received a call from the front desk. Mrs. Thompson's checking in, they said. She's staying one night only. Checking her room number, I noticed it matched mine. Confused, I double-checked. We hadn't had any bookings since last month. I hung up and tried to brush off my unease. But as soon as the receiver clicked, a chill swept through me that wasn't entirely from the cold spring air. I took my radio to the front desk, where a tired night clerk greeted me with a yawn. She repeated Mrs. Thompson's name, Teresa, and then said something I couldn't quite process. But as soon as she spoke again, her words stuck in my head. It's not her first time here, you know. I turned back to the room and saw a folded piece of paper on the table. Written in neat script was one name, Teresa. And next to it, her room number. That night, I went to the 3rd floor and knocked gently on my door. Nothing. Walking into the room, everything looked as if no one had ever been there. The bed was unmade but neatly folded back, a light turned off. Yet the air smelled faintly of perfume, and I could see the outline of an empty suitcase where hers should have been. A cold dread crept up my spine. I sat on the edge of the bed and reached for her folder. The file inside contained nothing, only a few pieces of paper with what appeared to be old addresses scribbled on them. As I left, something brushed past me. A chill surged through the room, as if the temperature had dropped another degree or two. I stepped back into the hallway, hearing a faint whisper that sounded like, "Stay," but it was too soft to be sure. That night, I worked in silence, listening for any sign of her returning. But by morning, when I finally checked my door, it remained locked as before, with no trace of Teresa anywhere. The hotel staff knew nothing about her, and the records showed no one checking into that room since its last inhabitant had left years earlier. Years later, after moving on from the Phoenix Hotel, I still can't help but wonder, was she just a figment of my imagination? Or is there really something out there waiting in those abandoned rooms, never truly leaving? And as you listen to this, does that door creak in your own hallway, or do you hear someone's whisper calling softly from the night air? The phone on my nightstand vibrated softly. It was 3 a.m., and most were fast asleep in my small apartment in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I hesitated, then picked up the receiver, wondering who would call such an hour. The static hissed in my ear, a familiar sound from these late-night talk shows. My mind immediately went to the midnight frequency. "Hello?" I asked, my voice hoarse and slow, as if waking from a dream. "Ma'am." "This is Midnight Frequency," a soothing male voice replied. "You called in last week about the haunted house near your hometown." I sat up straighter, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Yeah. That was me." "Well, we have another caller's story that might interest you," he said. The static kicked back in, growing louder for just a moment as if an actual phone call was on. "Okay," I mumbled, adjusting to the idea of another nightmarish tale. "Tell me about it." The caller this time is Jack. He's going to share something that happened with his family, something that even he can't explain. The voice paused. "Jack. Are you there?" My heart leapt in my chest as if I had been startled awake from a nightmare. "Yes, I'm here," I whispered. "I was at the old homestead last summer on a night shift for my job at the power plant," Jack began his story. "It's an old place, with rooms that seem to never change since our family moved there decades ago." "Tell me about it," I said, leaning closer into the receiver as if trying to eavesdrop. "The house is just north of here," he continued in a soft voice. "Always dark and quiet after sundown, but I was doing my rounds when it should have been completely empty. No one had lived there for years. I could feel goosebumps forming." "That sounds spooky," I said, trying to keep calm. "Indeed," Jack agreed. "And that's where things got odd." The static whispered in the background, almost as if mocking us both. It was a warm July night. My shift usually ended at midnight, but for some reason, my phone rang right after I finished up. The sound of ringing echoed faintly before cutting out, giving way to another silence that stretched and grew cold. "Well, what did you do?" I asked, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as if it could feel my fear. "I went to get it," Jack said. "It was just a quick check. Maybe something important had come through." I grabbed the cordless phone from its cradle, but before I could reach for it, I saw her. "Your grandmother?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He paused, and the static grew louder again, as if in agreement. "She was there. Sitting at the kitchen table where she always sat when we were kids, right at its center." The phone crackled, almost as if it were trying to interrupt his story. Her face was peaceful, but I knew it couldn't be real. I could feel my breath catching in my throat. "And what did you do?" Jack hesitated, the sound of static shifting around us. "I froze," he admitted. "But then, she looked up at me with those deep blue eyes and smiled, so warmly, yet I knew something was wrong about it." "Go on," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. The smile didn't feel right. It felt hollow, like a mask. The phone static seemed to be laughing, mocking us both. But then she spoke in that soft, familiar voice, but this time, it was too young. It should have been her old, raspy voice. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What did she say? She just said, "I'm home." The phone static cut off abruptly as if the line had gone dead. Silence followed for a long moment. And then, it was dark again, Jack concluded. The kitchen, everything, and I was alone. No sign of her. I couldn't speak, the dread in my chest so thick and heavy that it seemed to weigh down everything. "Can you explain what happened?" I finally managed to whisper. "I can't," he replied. "Not really. But something is still there. Something watching. Something that should be gone." The static filled the silence with its hollow laughter, echoing in my ears. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the connection went dead. At 3:17 a.m. on a chilly November night, I hung up the phone and turned to the mirror in my bedroom. It was just a quick glance, but as soon as my eyes met that glass surface, something stirred, a fleeting, childlike form hovering inches behind me. The reflection vanished before my very eyes, leaving me with an unsettling sense of not having seen everything. I blinked and looked again, but all that remained were my own tired features staring back at me in the dim light. A shiver ran down my spine as I began to dial the number for the midnight frequency. My night shift job at the local newspaper had left me feeling isolated, and now this was happening. "Hello," came a smooth, comforting voice through the static of the radio. "This is Midnight. What's your story?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Sam. I'm in Duluth, Minnesota, and something strange has been going on." The host responded quietly, his tone patient. "Could you tell me more about what's happening?" Well, there was no hiding it anymore. I told him about the reflections that wouldn't stay still. How they appeared as a child, always appearing in the middle of the night when my lights were low and shadows danced on the walls. The way he seemed so close, yet never quite within reach. "I see," said Midnight with his deep voice. "Could you describe what you saw tonight?" I began to recount the details. He was standing there, just a little boy in a jacket, almost like a ghost. The strangest part was that it happened in the mirror of my car. I got out and looked again, but by then, he was gone. A silence filled the air as Midnight processed this information. "Do you think it could be?" "Maybe," I interrupted. "But it's not just the mirrors. There are times when I glance up at the ceiling in my bedroom and see something there, a small figure that disappears almost instantly." There was another pause before he continued, his voice softening. "Have any of your family or friends noticed these occurrences?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No one's seen anything. I'm the only one who has. But it's been happening more often lately." Midnight's response was thoughtful and sincere. It's not uncommon for people to experience these kinds of phenomena in isolation, especially during times of stress or change. "Have you had any recent upheavals in your life?" I hesitated before answering truthfully. "Yes, actually. I just lost my mother a few months ago, and now this is happening." The radio crackled with static as if Midnight were trying to hold back his emotions. "I'm sorry for your loss, Sam." That's when it happened. The mirror in my bedroom began to fog over slightly. I could feel the coldness seep into my bones as I watched the condensation spread across the glass. "Sam, can you hear me?" "Yes," I whispered. "What is that movement behind the mirror now?" A long, tense silence stretched out on the other end of the line. Then Midnight spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm here, Sam. We'll figure this out together." But as he said those words, my reflection in the fogged-up mirror started to blur and shimmer. The boy was back, this time more than ever, closer, almost reaching through the glass. With a final jolt of dread, I hung up the phone and slammed it against the side table before rushing out of the room, leaving the radio chatter behind me in the darkened house. In my mind's eye, I saw the boy lingering just beyond that barrier, watching as I fled into the night with only the howling wind to keep me company. "Good night, Sam," came the calm voice through the static before it faded to nothingness, leaving me alone and unsure of what the next morning would hold. The radio crackled with static before settling into the quiet of an empty late-night highway. "This is Midnight Frequency," the host's voice whispered from the speaker, his tone calm but unwavering. Tonight's story comes to us from a listener in Portland, Maine. Let's see what he has to share. "Hi," the caller's voice was hesitant, like stepping into an empty room. "My name is Sam, and this isn't just a call, it's almost an invasion of privacy, but I need to talk about something that's been following me night after night for months now." Sam paused, as if gathering his thoughts in the stillness of the late hour. 2 years ago, my wife and I moved into our old family home. It was a relic from the 1920s, big windows, creaky wooden floors that were always cold. We were thrilled to be reunited with it, despite its quirks. Little did we know just how much one of those quirks would haunt us. The radio host gave a gentle nod, his voice low and reassuring. "Go on, Sam." Sam's voice grew quiet, as if trying to recall the event precisely. "It was a crisp autumn night last October. I came home from my night shift at the hospital. It had been a rough day. The house was dark except for the flicker of a single light in the kitchen. My wife was out late for her own night class, and I had the place to myself. I made a cup of tea and settled into the living room. It was quiet, too quiet. Something about it felt off. I couldn't put my finger on why until about half an hour later when I heard them. Soft, almost imperceptible footsteps echoing through the floorboards. They weren't quick or heavy, they were slow, almost as if someone had forgotten their shoes. I ignored it at first, maybe a cat or a rodent. But then, just as I was brewing another cup of tea, they stopped right outside my bedroom door. For 3 seconds, nothing. Just the soft static of the radio and the distant sound of a car driving by down the empty street. Then, another step, a single one, slow and deliberate. I turned on the light, but the footsteps had vanished. I checked my watch, it was 1:34 a.m. Curious more than anything else, I went to bed, trying not to think too much about what I'd heard. The host's voice continued in its gentle tone. "How did you feel when they stopped outside your door?" Sam swallowed hard, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was like something out of a ghost story. I tried to get some sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, it would happen again, those footsteps, walking and stopping right at the door. The radio host's voice grew quieter, reflecting Sam's discomfort. "Did you tell anyone about this?" "Not really," Sam admitted. "My wife came home when she got out of class, and the whole thing was just too bizarre. When I mentioned it to her over breakfast the next morning, she seemed more intrigued than scared. But I kept hearing those footsteps every night, until one evening something shifted." On that night, Sam had been on the edge of sleep, trying not to think about what might be walking in his house. He drifted into a light doze when he heard it, those soft steps again, closer this time. Before he could fully process them, the door slowly creaked open. Sam froze. "The footsteps stopped right where I stood," he said, his voice strained. "For what felt like an eternity, I just stared at that doorway, listening to nothing but the sound of my own heart pounding." The host's voice lingered in the air. "What happened next?" "The door slowly shut behind me," Sam whispered, his breath coming out as a ghostly fog between his lips. And then, it was gone. Silence filled the studio. Only the static and the distant hum of a few old radio stations competed for attention. "Sam," the host's voice finally broke through the quiet, "do you think whoever, or whatever, was making those footsteps ever came back?" There was no answer from Sam, his phone had hung up. The host paused, letting the uncertainty linger before concluding with a final whisper, "We'll have to wait and see what happens next." The static on the radio grew louder as the last of Sam's story dissipated into the night air. "You're listening to the Midnight Frequency. Keep the lights where they are." The phone hummed into life beside me, startling me as I drifted through the droning background of my night shift. My eyes snapped open from their bleary slumber as I reached for it, feeling the coolness of the plastic beneath my fingertips. "Operator?" I mumbled groggily into the receiver, yawning to clear my throat. "I think there's a problem with this line." But when the operator came on the line, her voice soft and urgent, something about her tone roused me fully awake. "Ms. Jones, you've got an incoming call," she said hurriedly. "A Mr. Thompson from Charleston, South Carolina. He's been talking in circles for 10 minutes now, repeating he just needs to speak with someone." "All right," I replied, my voice still thick with sleep. "I'll take it." The line crackled and sputtered before a male voice finally cut through the static, raspy and unsteady. "I called every damn radio show in South Carolina. No one ever answers. You might be my only shot." "Mr. Thompson?" I asked politely. "No, that's not what it is," he whispered. "Not now. I need to tell you something. Something terrible happened to me years ago. It was on a night like this. I couldn't sleep. Just wouldn't go away." His voice began to tremble, and the line cut out for a few moments before coming back. "Is everything all right?" I asked gently. "Had to get in my car," he stuttered. "It was just too quiet." A long moment passed as we both listened to the hiss of the radio static. Finally, Mr. Thompson's voice returned, quieter and shakier than before. "I'm at St. Mary's Church, you know, the old one that burned down years ago. It was all quiet out there, no cars on the highway, just nothing." "All right," I replied, trying to stay calm despite his unsettling tone. "What happened next?" "I went up to the church and something was inside," he said slowly. "Not ghosts or anything like that. But I saw this woman in white standing at the altar." My mind raced, trying to understand what he meant. "She was just standing there, and then I saw her, she turned to me and the line went dead again. She looked right at me," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. "It's like she can see through everything." "Did you see anyone else in the church?" I asked as calmly as possible. "No," he replied quickly. "Just her, and then it was just too quiet." The line sputtered again, but this time Mr. Thompson's voice came back, hoarse with fear. "I had to get out of there, I thought she might be." "Mr. Thompson," I said sharply, cutting him off. "Are you still there?" "Yeah," he replied, sounding on the verge of tears. But it was too quiet." The line went dead, leaving me with only the faint hiss of static. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned forward, trying to catch even a whisper more. But the connection had been severed. I hung up and let out a long breath. St. Mary's Church, that old abandoned building. I should never have taken this call. At 3 in the morning, as my shift ended, I pulled into the old Butte Diner. The sign read, "Last call," but it seemed like an ironic joke. The only light came from the fluorescent lamps that hummed softly overhead, casting a sickly green hue on the patrons huddled at the counter, most of them miners, some of them ashen-faced from days in the depths of the earth. I parked my truck beside the door and grabbed my coat. The wind howled outside like an angry spirit, trying to break through the thin barrier of glass. I adjusted the collar against the cold, wondering if the diner's owner, Mr. O'Connell, would still be up or had already turned in for a late night's sleep. As I stepped out into the brisk night air, something caught my eye, a faint pulsing light at the end of the mine shaft, blinking in and out like an abandoned Christmas decoration. My heart pounded, but I pushed on, walking down the empty street toward the looming silhouette of Empire Hill. The last time I had visited this spot was years ago, back when I was a teenager helping my father with his mining business. We called it the Lost Shaft, because no one knew exactly what lay beneath that rusty steel door. Now as an adult with more responsibilities and less bravado, I hesitated before turning the old key in the lock. The air inside smelt of damp earth and decay, thick and heavy. The dim light flickered when I turned on my flashlight, casting eerie shadows across the walls. My breathing grew heavier, like an anchor pulling me down. I was here for a reason I couldn't quite articulate, just a gut feeling that something wasn't right. As I descended deeper into the shaft, my footsteps echoed off the stone walls, each tap 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 ringing out like a warning. At 30 feet below, the door creaked open. I pushed it aside and stepped inside. The space was narrow and cramped, barely enough room to stand upright. My headlamp cast a beam over the cracked floor and crumbling tunnel walls. A faint sound, a soft knocking, bounced back from the darkness, like the pulse of a distant heartbeat. I tried to place its origin but couldn't pinpoint it. Then, as if summoned by my presence, the knocking grew louder, rhythmic and insistent. It was coming from below me, from somewhere deep within the earth itself. The sound seemed almost human, not quite a knock on a door but more like a plea for help. A sob of dread twisted in my gut. Before I could turn around or reach out to investigate further, my flashlight beam caught something glinting among the rocks. At first, I thought it was just a loose metal part from an old mine cart, but as I moved closer, my pulse quickened. Lying on the ground was a rusty miner's lamp, its glass casing cracked and broken, yet still burning with a faint, flickering flame. I froze, holding my breath. The knocking seemed to pause for a moment before resuming, louder this time, growing in intensity. I felt a hand grip me, cold fingers digging into my shoulder. I screamed and jerked away, only to find myself alone once more. The light from the miner's lamp dimmed as if extinguishing itself. As I stumbled backward, the knocking resumed, urgent and unyielding. It echoed through the shaft, growing louder until it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. In the stillness of the night, those knocks were all that could be heard. And then, just when the worst part was almost here, my phone rang in my pocket, a soft, persistent hum cutting through the silence. I reached for it, but before I could answer, the knocking ceased abruptly and the world went deathly quiet. The phone stopped ringing, as if aware of its own intrusion on this eerie scene. I stood there, shivering and alone, under the cold and silent mine that had held so many secrets and perhaps too much truth for a man to uncover. As I made my way back up the shaft, the lamp's light flickered weakly behind me, casting an unsettling glow over the darkness. And in the distance, where the knocking had been loudest, I felt something watching. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. The phone hummed with an otherworldly static before finally disconnecting. It was 3:27 a.m., and as I hung up the receiver, my fingers felt cold against its surface. I had just ended another night shift at St. Mary's Hospital in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The ward was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of a broken ceiling fan. A sense of unease settled over me like a shroud, making every muscle tense. I shuffled down the empty hallway to the nurse's station, my feet barely making a sound on the polished linoleum floor. My colleague, Lisa, was already there, her eyes fixed on something in front of her. I couldn't see what held her attention until she spoke. "Did you hear that?" Her voice was soft, almost reverent. Before I could answer, the door to Ward 3B creaked open with a disturbing whine that seemed to come from inside the room itself. My heart lurched as if the room was exerting an unseen force. Lisa's expression remained unchanged, but her hand gripped mine so tightly I thought my bones would crack. "Who's in there?" I managed, my voice barely audible over the steady drip of a nearby machine. Without a word, she pointed to a small lamp by the door that flickered weakly as if alive. The light cast eerie shadows on the empty beds and medical equipment, making me feel like we were trespassing in an ancient tomb. Lisa nodded towards one of the unoccupied cribs at the far end of the room. It was her. Her whisper was tinged with a strange conviction that chilled my spine. She led me to the crib, her hands still firmly entwined with mine. It was then I noticed the name tag hanging loosely from its hook, Sarah Jensen. But there were no charts or medical records for Sarah Jensen on any of the monitors in the ward. My mind raced as Lisa reached out and gently lifted a sheet. Underneath, an empty bassinet lay untouched, its edges dusted with a fine layer of what looked like baby powder. Lisa's grip tightened until my knuckles went white, but she didn't pull it away, her fingers were trembling slightly. A small doll was propped up beside the bassinet, wearing clothes that mimicked a hospital gown and hat. The eyes were closed, the cheeks pale under their makeup. I could see my own reflection in its glassy surface, distorted by the flickering light. Lisa's voice broke the silence. "Do you believe she might have come to us?" I didn't answer, because even as the question echoed, another sound drew closer, a faint wail that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Lisa turned towards the door and we both froze. The sound grew louder, like an infant crying in protest or fear. I stumbled backward, crashing into a nearby cabinet, my breath coming out in short gasps. Lisa didn't move, she was staring at something beyond me, her eyes wide with something that looked like awe, though to what, even she might not know. And then, the door slammed shut behind us. We were alone, and that cry, it seemed, had never been ours to hear. In the quiet town of Macon, Georgia, the night held its breath. It was a small thing, really, just a phone call to the late-night radio show on the horizon, a place where the ordinary veered into something unexplained. At 3:07 a.m., as I lay in bed, an old house off Highway 41 rang with a single, chilling ring. "My name is Sarah." I'd always been fascinated by oddities, strange lights, cold spots, whispers at night. But this felt different. It was like a thread was being tugged, and I couldn't resist following it further into the dark. I pulled on an old sweater, slipped my feet into worn sneakers, and crept out of my apartment without disturbing my sleeping roommate, Mary. The night outside was thick with fog, the kind that whispers secrets in your ear as you step out alone. I made my way to the old house I'd always wondered about, its paint chipped and peeling like forgotten memories. The front door creaked open silently, a familiar sound in this town where doors could whisper secrets too. Inside, it was colder than usual, the heat having failed again. The living room felt empty and oppressive, as if even the furniture had grown shy of me. I wandered into the kitchen, flicking on a light switch that hesitated, then buzzed to life. But it was in the nursery, at the end of the hall, where the chill really began. It was like stepping through ice into an old house's past. The room held echoes of time long gone, a crib and toys worn smooth by years of children who would never return. The window was open, a gust of wind sending chimes tinkling with each breath. And then I saw it. No one had ever lived in this house for decades, yet there it was, a face pressed to the glass, pale as winter moonlight, staring back at me. It moved slightly, watching me through the night, its eyes unblinking and cold. The static on my phone began to rise, an uncomfortable hum that cut into the silence like a blade. "Hello? Are you still there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of chimes in the wind. The face didn't blink or turn away. It just watched as if waiting for something. Mary called me back then, her voice sharp with worry. "Sarah, are you okay?" I snapped my phone shut, clutching it tightly as I raced out of the house, the cold seeping into every pore. The nursery door slammed shut behind me, but not before that face lingered in memory, a fleeting glimpse of something that didn't belong. As I walked back down the street, past old oak trees and empty houses, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. My heart pounded against my ribcage, echoing through the night. The radio show host whispered calm words into the static, but it did little to soothe. And then, in a corner of my mind, something sharp flickered like a pinprick of ice. Had I heard something before stepping outside? A faint whisper, or perhaps nothing at all. Back home now, with Mary and the silence that still hung heavy between us, I lay awake. The nursery window remained empty, but not so much anymore. That face lingered in my mind, watching me, waiting for something. In the quiet of the night, there was a whisper. It was like hearing someone's name whispered softly, just before the light flickers off. And then nothing, only the cold breath of an unexplainable chill that stays with you, a reminder that sometimes, in the dark, not all faces are real. This next call came in just after 3, the hour they say the veil is thinnest. The static hiss of my old phone crackled in the silence. "Good evening," crooned a voice from the darkness. "Do you have a story to share?" "My name's Tom. I'm from Providence, Rhode Island, where it gets cold and dark at 3 in the morning. You wouldn't believe how long it takes for the night air to warm up when you step outside. I called in because of this one step on my stairs. It was always freezing, even though everyone in the house had heaters going and nothing else felt chilly. I'd shiver every time I walked past that spot, the middle one in our old Victorian house's grand staircase. It started last Christmas, right around New Year's Eve. I remember the snow piled up outside, white as a graveyard under the moonlight. My brother, Jack, and I had stayed up late to keep warm after Dad left for an overnight shift. We were playing with my new webcam when suddenly it stopped working. The screen was just black, no lights or anything. "Shit," I mumbled, trying to find another charger. "Jack, did you plug in your headphones?" He shrugged, then froze mid-sentence. His arm hung out into thin air, and his face had gone pale under the dim lamplight. He whispered, "Tom, that step is freezing." I turned around quickly, but everything looked normal. My heart was racing, I rubbed my neck, feeling a chill all over. Then I saw it, a dark spot in the corner of my eye. A shadowy form standing by the stairs, watching us. "Jack," I called out, "get your ass back here." He didn't move. He just stared at that step in between me and the landing. A step that should be cool but wasn't. It was bone-chilling. "Tom, it's breathing," Jack said faintly. Breathing? That made no sense, we were the only ones upstairs. Yet, the air around that step moved like a living thing, sighing, wheezing. A cold spot so potent, it felt like the floor had been pulled away beneath my feet. I couldn't look away. Jack's eyes rolled back, and he slumped into the wall beside me. I grabbed his shoulders, but he was limp as paper. Then came a strangled noise from behind us, a high-pitched gasp that seemed to resonate in my chest. The room spun. Before I could react, darkness took over, like someone had pulled a curtain down right there on the stairs. When I opened my eyes again, everything was normal, except for the dark spot on the step. It hadn't been there before. I stepped forward, intending to check it out, but my legs wouldn't move. Panic clawed at me as I realized Jack wasn't breathing anymore. There was only one way down those stairs. I had to go. My hand hovered over his cold one. I took a breath and began the descent, step by treacherous step, each one colder than the last. By the time I hit the bottom landing, the step was no longer there at all, only a patch of bare floor where it had been before. A deep, empty well. The house was silent now, save for my ragged breathing and the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I stumbled into the living room, phone still clutched to my ear, but there was no more static hiss or midnight host waiting. Just darkness and the ever-waiting cold spot on the stairs. Tom hung up the call, leaving that step alone in the shadows. A chill ran down his spine, one that wouldn't let go. In the quiet of the night, at 3:17 a.m., when the moon had dipped into the horizon and Amarillo was asleep, Jack McAllister pulled his long-haul rig off the interstate. The road ahead was a smooth expanse of blacktop, with headlights from other trucks vanishing in the distance like ghostly apparitions. His eyes adjusted to the dark, but the night seemed more watchful than usual. A chill crept up his spine as he turned on his CB radio, hoping for company. Jack leaned into the microphone, turning the static into a semblance of control. Amarillo 12 calling, Amarillo 12 standing by. His voice echoed through the cab, breaking the silence. Suddenly, the CB crackled with an oddness, something that felt not quite right, as if the airwaves themselves were whispering secrets. "Hey there, Amarillo 12, a voice said, smooth, low, and entirely unexpected. "It's been too long." Jack's skin prickled at the familiarity of his own name coming through the radio. He blinked, adjusting the mic until it was directly in front of him. "Who's calling?" "This is Amarillo 12, he repeated cautiously. The voice paused, then continued, its tone almost conversational. "I know your name, Jack McAllister. I've known for a long time." Jack hesitated, his heart pounding like it was trying to break free from his chest. "What do you want?" His voice wavered slightly, betraying more of an edge than he intended. The response was immediate, chillingly straightforward. "Just wanted to say hello." The voice trailed off, and for a moment, there was nothing but the static that filled Jack's truck like an oppressive blanket. Then, in a rush, it returned, shorter this time, more urgent. "Be careful, Jack," the voice said swiftly before cutting abruptly. As quickly as it had arrived, it vanished into silence. For what seemed like an eternity, Jack sat there with his heart racing and his mind spinning. "Amarillo 12 out," he finally muttered, hanging up the mic. The CB radio went back to static, but inside him, a voice persisted, whispering, "Be careful." He reached for the phone, about to make an emergency call, when it rang. His hands shook as he picked up, expecting another voice, but only heard his own name spoken once again. "Jack," it said softly. And then it was gone, leaving Jack alone in the dark truck, the dialer still humming silently on its face. In the quiet of a Friday night in Galesburg, Illinois, Sarah was making her way through the dimly lit industrial park to pick up her shift as a night security guard at the power plant. The cold air snaked its way along the empty streets, wrapping itself around her like an old acquaintance. As she approached the main gate of the plant, a phone call interrupted the silence. "Hello? Is this security control?" Her breath was visible in the chilly night air as she held the receiver to her ear. A voice, distorted and static-filled, crackled through the line, its words barely comprehensible but sending shivers down Sarah's spine. "They're calling from..." Before the call could be properly identified, the phone went dead. Sarah hung up, puzzled, but not alarmed. It was common for signals to drop in the industrial areas of Galesburg. She locked her gate and made her way towards the plant in trance with a dismissive thought, just some static. Inside, Sarah's shift began unremarkably enough, checking equipment logs, patrolling the perimeter. The night was still and silent, filled only by distant hums and whirs from machinery she didn't fully understand. It wasn't long before her routine patrol brought her to the train tracks that ran alongside the power plant. The tracks wound their way through the abandoned lot next to the facility. In the day they were a busy route for freight cars, but now, with no one around after dark, Sarah usually ignored them and continued on. Tonight was different. A lone track, lit only by the moon's feeble light, caught her eye as she passed. It was then that she saw it, a figure moving along the tracks, head bowed, as if in desperate haste. The figure wore a heavy coat, its silhouette barely discernible against the moonlit sky. Sarah slowed to a halt, her heart pounding, unsure whether to continue or turn back. She listened intently but heard nothing, no footsteps, no sound at all. With every fiber of her being screaming caution, she took another step towards the figure. As she got closer, she realized that it was not a person, but rather a coat. A heavy parka with a zipper that ran down to its bottom, hanging in slow motion as if suspended by unseen hands. Sarah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "Hey there," she called softly, hoping to draw attention and perhaps an explanation from the figure. There was no response, only the coat continued its endless glide along the rails. As it passed directly under a nearby streetlight, Sarah saw clearly that the zipper was open down to the bottom of the coat, showing a void where someone's feet should be. A chill swept across her skin, and she realized that this coat, unfastened at the bottom, had been moving without any body inside. The thought lodged in her mind like an icy spear, leaving her gasping for breath as she stepped back. In that moment of stunned horror, Sarah knew that what she was witnessing could not be explained by anything mundane. It was as if someone gone long before her, was still walking the tracks she had known since childhood, moving in a way impossible with a human body. She stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing to make sense of the unspeakable phenomenon. The coat disappeared around a bend in the track, and for a heartbeat, Sarah thought of nothing but getting out of there. Slowly, she turned away, her flashlight slicing through the darkness as she hurried back towards the main gate. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the image of the unexplainable movement, or the figure that had seemed to have no feet at all. The telephone rang in the silence of the living room, its single ring echoing through the house like a ghostly invitation. Sarah clutched the receiver tighter, her heart pounding as she considered picking up. She had hung up all previous calls from Columbus General Hospital, but something felt different tonight. "Hello?" she whispered, and almost immediately, a man's voice crackled over the airwaves. "Is this Mrs. Jackson?" Sarah recognized the voice, Dr. Nelson, the family doctor who had always been so kind to her children. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself before answering. "Yes. There was an accident. Your son has passed away." The words hung in the room like a thick fog. Sarah's mind raced, but she couldn't remember what was being said beyond those first few sentences. What was different about tonight? Why didn't her body move? "Mrs. Jackson, are you still there?" Dr. Nelson sounded concerned now. Sarah forced herself to speak. "Yes, what happened?" A moment of pause before he replied, his voice a soothing but distant rumble. "Your son was driving home from his shift as a night guard when..." Something shifted in the background. Static hummed into existence, breaking the spell. Sarah's eyes darted around the empty room as if searching for something that wasn't there. Dr. Nelson continued, "He stopped at a red light, and a vehicle came speeding towards him. Your son was hit by a car on Highway 45. The accident happened late last night. Sarah nodded slowly, even though no one could see her in the darkened room. She recalled his last shift ending hours earlier but dismissed it. Boys were known to stay out later. "What's wrong with the line?" she asked aloud, just realizing how quiet the doctor sounded now. There was a tense pause before Dr. Nelson spoke again. "The line, there is some interference. Could you please hold on for a moment?" Sarah bit her lip, feeling an inexplicable chill creep up her spine. She glanced at the clock, 2:30 a.m., and she shouldn't be awake. Her son was supposed to have been home hours ago. "Mrs. Jackson?" Dr. Nelson's voice cut through the static briefly, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Sarah swayed in place, her vision blurring as if the room itself was starting to warp. "Doctor," she managed, but there was no reply. The line went dead. Sarah slammed down the receiver and hurried from the living room to the kitchen, where a glass of water stood forgotten on the counter. She twisted open the lid, chugging it in gulps even as her mind raced with unanswerable questions. Why did she hear his call so late? Why was everything so wrong? She stumbled toward the hallway where her son's bedroom lay quiet and still. His closet door hung ajar. Inside, he kept his old army boots and medals from his brief stint before going to college. Sarah reached out, touching the cold metal of one of the pins. It felt off. She turned on the light and stared into the room, half expecting him to be sitting up in bed, maybe reading or writing in a journal about the night's events. But no, his space remained empty and silent as she had left it. His clock still read 10:29 p.m., like he hadn't moved from that position. As Sarah stepped back into the hallway, an eerie silence filled her home. The air was thick with an unexplained dread, every shadow seemed to move just a bit too much in the darkness. She turned around, almost expecting him to be there, but only emptiness met her gaze. She closed his door gently and crept down the stairs, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain this nightmare. Her fingers brushed against the banister, which was unusually cold. She shivered, stepping out into the chilly night air. Upstairs, in his old room, she had found a letter he wrote before going to college, tucked under the mattress. Opening it, she read, "Mom and Dad. I just wanted you guys to know I'm fine here. Just taking things day by day. Maybe we can write back and forth, like real pen pals. Love. John." The paper crumpled in her hand as she read the final sentence, "But don't worry, everything's gonna be okay." Sarah sank down onto the steps, clutching the letter to her chest. She had no idea how wrong he was. No clue at all. "If you're still with us, good." A lot of people stopped listening alone after this one. The call came in just as night was swallowing up Oxford, Mississippi. The line was fuzzy, as if the speaker had turned their radio up too high and was drifting right out of broadcast range. "Hello." I muttered into the microphone, my voice echoing over the static. "Hi, I don't think you can hear me," a young girl's hesitant voice whispered from the other end. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "We're doing our best to pick up any signals, honey. Can you tell me where you are?" I'm at the old Franklin house." Her voice trembled now, and the phone crackled as if someone had left a window open in a stormy night. My daughter, Lila, was only 6 years old, but she never seemed to be alone for long. "What's going on out there?" I asked, my throat tightening with unease. "I just wanted to play hide and seek," the girl said softly, as if whispering in a cemetery. "But, it's not like usual." My breath hitched. Hide and seek was supposed to be fun. But something wasn't right. "Did you see someone out there?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "No one is here," she replied, and the silence that followed felt thicker than anything the radio could transmit. A shiver ran down my spine, and I glanced at the clock on the wall of my small studio. It read 12:05 a.m., but the time felt like it had stopped moving. "What do you mean, no one is here?" I pressed, my voice growing more urgent with each passing second. "It's dark," she said, her voice now filled with a strange excitement that sent chills down my spine. "I saw some shadows, and they looked bigger than any other shadows in the world. They were moving. I was scared." "Tell me exactly what you see," I urged, my heart racing as if it might jump right out of my chest. "I'm playing hide and seek," she exclaimed suddenly, her voice bright with a manic kind of glee that only children could muster. "And someone wants to play too. Can we do it? Please?" My stomach twisted in a way I couldn't explain. It was as if the night had been waiting for just such an invitation. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "You can stay on the phone and keep talking while Lila and I play hide-and-seek with you." There was a pause on the line, and then she started giggling, a sound that cut through the air like ice. "You're really going to do it? This is awesome." But something in my gut told me this might not be as simple as it seemed. The phone was still crackling with static, and I could hear the distant hum of an old house creaking in the wind. "Okay," she said finally, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "You're ready to start?" I nodded, even though there was no one to see me. "Let's go," I whispered. The first whisper of a shadow moved across the screen in my peripheral vision, but it was gone as soon as it appeared. "I'm hiding now," she cried, and then her voice faded into the static that seemed to seep from every corner of the old house. A deep silence followed, broken only by the distant howling of an owl and the faint sound of my own heartbeat. The line went dead for a moment before crackling back to life with another girl's voice, giggling and whispering secrets into the night. And then it was over, like the last breath of a dying ember. I sat in silence, staring at the empty phone and wondering if anyone would ever know what happened out there on that old Franklin House lawn at midnight, when the shadows seemed bigger than anything this world could hold. It was just another quiet night at my grandmother's house on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. I had returned home from a long, lonely shift at the local diner, hoping to catch up with some old family photos and maybe pull an early night. But as I began flipping through the albums, a strange feeling crept over me. It was as if someone, was watching. The house was silent except for the gentle creaks of the old wood floor underfoot. The air smelled faintly of dust and unwashed windowsills, like an attic left untouched for years. I picked up a worn, brown leather album, its edges peeling with age. Turning the pages, each photo seemed to hold a secret, but it wasn't until I reached my mother's graduation picture that something strange happened. She was in her cap and gown, holding a bouquet of fake flowers, beaming happily into the camera. But something about the way she posed drew my attention to another figure in the background. A man, or so it seemed, certainly no one we had ever known, was perched casually on an old rocking chair behind her. The photo was taken years ago, yet he looked as if he'd been there only a moment ago. "Mom," I whispered, "who is that?" I examined the photo more closely. The man's face was partially obscured by the shadows cast from the nearby window, but his arms were sprawled across the chair's armrests, and one leg hung over the side. He appeared relaxed, almost content, but there was something unsettling about him, a hint of a smile that seemed forced, an odd angle to his posture. As I held the photo up to inspect it better, my reflection in the glass caught me by surprise. For a fleeting moment, the man's eyes met mine, locked on with a depth I couldn't quite explain. His gaze was calculating. Then he blinked, and his image blurred like water droplets dancing in an autumn mist. I swallowed hard, setting the photo aside and pinching myself to wake up from this nightmare. But the reality didn't change. The man had been there, for sure. And every family photo I picked up after that seemed to have its own version of him, a silent, unseen occupant sitting patiently in an old rocking chair. The fear was like a shiver down my spine. It started small but grew with each picture. I began to think about the countless nights when no one had been home, yet these photos were full of men who should never have been there. Tonight wasn't supposed to be different. Yet as I closed the album and set it back on the table, a soft knocking echoed from upstairs. My blood ran cold as it seemed to repeat my name, Kara. It was just another quiet night on the graveyard shift at the old Bellingham textile mill. The air was cold and thick with the dust and decaying fabric that clung to every thread of my worn sweater. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me from a dark corner, but when I turned to look, there was only the flicker of an abandoned machine casting twisted shadows on the wall. Around 2:30 in the morning, I decided to grab another cup of coffee from the vending machine. The empty hallways were eerily silent, and the echo of my footsteps seemed to follow me down the long corridor. The machines around me hummed a dull, mechanical drone that punctuated the hush. I reached for the last coin in my pocket when I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper. "Help!" It came from under the floorboards near the vending machine. At first, I thought it might be a colleague playing a prank, but the voice was too weak, too desperate to be real. I leaned down cautiously and pressed my ear against the wooden planks. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Help, please." It sounded like someone in pain, possibly dying. Panic began to grip me as I fumbled for a flashlight and shone it under the boards. But when the light hit, there was nothing but an empty space filled with old wiring and dust. I tried to ignore the sensation that my own heartbeat echoed through the mill, but the whisper kept coming. "Help!" It seemed to be getting closer, more urgent. I stepped back from the machine and began to walk down the hallway, but every time I paused or turned a corner, the voice followed me. By the time I reached the main entrance of the mill, the whispers had become a full-blown scream, yet I could find no one except for myself in the vast expanse of the empty building. I ran outside into the crisp night air, my heart pounding against my ribcage as if it was trying to escape. The sky was clear, and the moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the darkened fields. But as I turned back toward the mill, I saw a figure standing on the steps leading up to the entrance, a figure that wasn't there before. It was just a mannequin from one of the old store displays, but it looked almost alive. With a chill running down my spine, I ran in circles around the building, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. But every time I stopped, I heard the whisper again, "Help, please." It echoed through the deserted mill as if it had been waiting for me, and now I couldn't escape it. The voice followed me home, a haunting echo that seemed to grow louder with each step back into my own life. When I finally managed to fall asleep, I dreamt of the mannequin standing on those steps, its eyes glowing in the darkness. And when I woke up, the whisper was still there, lingering under the floorboards. And now, every time I hear a similar echo of that desperate plea, I wonder if it's just another night or something more. In the quiet of an early autumn evening, as the sun dipped behind the Rocky Mountains and a light shroud of mist clung to the pines, I found myself alone in the old Elkhorn Inn. It was a place that seemed untouched by time, every corner whispering of tales long ago. A call rang through the night, my hand jerking from its resting spot on the bed. In the dim glow of the flashlight, I picked up the phone and listened to the familiar voice, late-night frequency. "Hello?" I asked hesitantly. The host paused for a moment before speaking in that slow, calm tone that seemed to carry through the static. "Good evening. We have an extraordinary story tonight from Estes Park, Colorado. Can you share with us your experience?" My name was Sarah, and I had just started my night shift as a housekeeper at the old Elkhorn Inn. The stories about it were enough to make me feel like I'd stepped back into a different era, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The guest who checked in that evening was someone I would never forget. Tall and thin, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that seemed out of place with the modern lobby, he moved with an air of quiet determination. His face, weathered by years gone by, bore a striking resemblance to a portrait hanging above the front desk. "You look like our last guest," the manager had said, pointing to a faded photograph. He disappeared without a trace in 1937. I could hardly believe my ears as I approached him at the counter. "Can I help you with something?" His eyes met mine for a moment before he spoke. "I am here to pay homage," he replied softly, his voice deep and gravelly. Without another word, we both made our way up to room 107, which had been unoccupied for years. As I unpacked the sparse bag of toiletries, a shiver ran down my spine. The walls felt cold under my fingertips, and the air grew heavier with each passing moment. The man watched me intently, his gaze never wavering. "Have you lived here before?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. His face softened slightly, almost regretfully. "I have," he said, then abruptly turned towards the door. Before I could react, he was gone. The night wore on with only me and the faint hum of the radio for company. By midnight, I had finished cleaning the room, but there was something I needed to check. Lying on the bed, I reached under it, feeling the familiar weight of a small, leather-bound book, unmistakably his. I left it where it lay, unable to tear myself away from the thought that he might return. Instead, I retreated into my duties, eager to be out of this room and back in mine. But as dawn approached, the cold air of early morning leaked through the door, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. The phone rang again, breaking me from my thoughts. The host's voice echoed in my ear, calm but urgent. "Sarah, can you tell us what happened next?" My heart raced as I realized that this was not just another night shift at the old Elkhorn Inn. Room 107 had become a place where time seemed to bend and twist. And now, with each passing second, it grew darker. A silence filled the line, stretching out like an unbreakable string. "Did you ever see him again?" the host's voice asked quietly. Before I could reply, the line went dead. The static hissed back into life, cutting off any chance of explanation or closure. Room 107 remained a shadowy mystery, its secrets locked away for all time, save for one curious housekeeper who had dared to look inside. "Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse." The darkness outside my window is a thick blanket, as if someone has draped it over the world to keep everyone warm. I sit alone in my old, rickety office, surrounded by endless forms and papers. It's 3 a.m., the usual time my phone would fall silent, but tonight, it rang. And before I could answer, a hand, cold and unyielding, brushed against the back of my shoulder. I turned to the speakerphone, listening to the static and crackle that should never pass for human voice. "My name is Michael, and this isn't the first night I've heard it. But tonight, something feels different." My throat constricts as I lift the receiver to my ear. A familiar whisper cuts through the silence. "Michael, why are you still here?" I pause, my breath catching in a mix of dread and curiosity. How could they know who I am? And what does it mean when their hand brushes my shoulder again, harder this time? "Leave," the voice commands. Before something happens. A shiver runs down my spine, and I can feel the hand pressing slightly against me. My phone screen lights up, showing a missed call from an unknown number. The caller ID shows the date and time, 3 a.m. Why? I ask into the receiver, trying to sound confident but failing miserably. There's no answer for several moments, just that unwavering pressure on my shoulder. Then, as if they're considering their words, the voice speaks again. Because you shouldn't be here. A sharp intake of breath from me is met by a sudden silence. The hand retreats, and the line goes dead. I sit in stunned silence for what feels like an eternity before flipping off my desk lamp. I leave the office with a heavy heart, the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the empty building. The truth is, I don't want to go home. Not yet. Not until I've figured out exactly how deep this goes. And so, as I climb into my car and drive down the long, dark road toward home, I can feel something watching me from the shadows. Something that doesn't want me where I am, but wants me to know it's here, waiting. At 3 a.m., I'm usually wide awake, but tonight something feels off. There's not that usual static lull before a caller hits the line. Instead, my headphones pulse with a strange, almost familiar quiet. I clear my throat, trying to mask my unease as I turn on the mic. Good evening, I start softly, my voice steady yet tinged with a hint of dread. This is Midnight Frequency. If you've had an encounter that keeps you up at night, please share it with us. No answer, just more silence. Then, a whisper, so faint and distant it might be the wind rustling through the mic. I strain to hear. Is anyone there? Comes the voice, raspy and raw. It's unmistakably human, but the tone sends shivers down my spine. It's been driving me crazy for months now. I can't help but lean in closer, more intrigued than afraid. Mr. or Ms., what is your story? Call me John, says the voice, almost as if reading from a script. Just tell me I'm not losing it. There's no mistaking the desperation in his words. I hear rustling on the other end, like pages shuffling through air. Then, abruptly, silence again. Are you still there? I ask after a moment of tense pause. More shuffling, more whispering. Yes, but I'm not alone now. A creaking noise joins the static, a wooden floor protesting against unseen footsteps. The mic crackles as if it's picking up an electrical storm. John, I say sharply, trying to keep my voice even, are you there by yourself? Another pause. No. And then, a whisper so soft and close that at first, I think I might have imagined it. Someone's behind me. The silence after is heavy, thick with tension. I can almost feel the unease in John's every breath. Can you see them? I ask, my voice barely audible over the static now. There's a long, uncomfortable pause before the whisper returns, this time closer, almost on the edge of breaking down. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Another creak, and suddenly there's a presence beside him. A shadowy figure that shouldn't be there steps into my line of sight, just in his mind. Or is it? John, what are you seeing? I urge. There's no answer this time. Instead, the silence hangs so thick that it chokes out any further sound. The mic hums with static, louder now, like an engine trying to start in a cold room. Finally, John breaks, his voice breaking as well. They're not moving, but I can feel their presence. And then, the line drops. A hard cut where before there was whispered conversation, a chill that lingers even after the mic is muted. I sit there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, to understand what just happened. But all I hear is the static, endless and oppressive. Was he talking to himself? Or something else entirely? The room around me feels colder now, the air almost palpable with an unspoken fear. The only sound is the quiet hum of the microphone, whispering secrets that might be true. And that's where we'll close the lines for tonight. If you made it this far, if you're still here in the dark with me, then you're one of us now. The ones who listen after midnight. The ones who don't quite turn the radio all the way off. Before you go, do one thing. Subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week we bring another lost night back from the static, and you don't want to miss the frequency when it opens again. Until then, keep a light on. Check the locks. And if your phone rings after 3, and there's only static on the other end, you don't have to answer. This has been the Midnight Frequency. Good night. And sleep with the radio on.